about the event.
Lovely.
Okay, so shall I start?
Yes, please, that would be wonderful.
Okay, great. So hello, everyone. It's Ivan Paya from the economics department. So let me share my screen here. So what I'll be talking about today is basically cracking numbers and economics, behavior and choice. So this is me, and this is my email address. I'm more than happy also for any of you to drop me any email after this talk, if there is something that you are particularly interested in, or you think you need some clarification. So please feel free to just email me at that email address. So cracking numbers, this is great. Obviously in economics we use numbers because we need them. And then basically, I don't know whether you know this, but actually economics is the science of decision. And basically in life is basically all about decision making, isn't it? We all have to continuously make important decisions, but the problem is that we live in an uncertain world, and then outcomes are determined by random factors. There are many things that escape our control, and we don't know what's going to happen. And despite that, we need to make those decisions even under this uncertainty or this risk. For instance, as you very well know, education is one of them. Your parents have to choose to what school to take you. Now you have to make a decision about your degree, whether you are going to do a master's degree or higher education, etc., and in what area. So obviously you don't know in which one maybe you can earn the highest salary, or also in which one you are going to be happier. There are also then decisions to make about careers, and then there are trade-offs sometimes between wages, stability of the job, location, etc. And obviously, if you have to invest your money, again, you have to buy assets, or to buy a house, to buy insurance, or you decide to gamble. There are always decisions that are made when we don't know what's obviously the truth, what's going to happen exactly. And this is what we call to make decisions under risk and uncertainty. Even obviously under health, the decisions about health, nutrition, treatment that you might need to get, the level of stress that you want to bear in your life, etc. All these are decisions that you have to make. And then what we do in economics is we study how people make these choices. Okay. So basically, this is a process where, first of all, we gather information, and at the end, we have to reach a decision. In the middle is where we need to crack numbers, is where we need to do the analysis at the individual level. We do them ourselves, but as economists, what we try to do is to try to understand how people make those decisions. So how people basically crack those numbers in their heads, right? And that's something that obviously is not easy to do, but obviously we have our methods to do that. And then in that respect, working with numbers for us is about understanding decision makers' behavior, how they behave in order to make the decision. And then what we have to do is we have to model such behavior. Why do we need to model such behavior by people? Because we want to make predictions about what might happen, and then in order to maybe make advice about what is the best thing to do, maybe what is the best policy. And then in that sense, understanding decision makers' behavior and modeling such behavior can help us to design policies and nudging Nudging is how to present maybe decisions to people such that maybe they can make the decision that you think is best for society. And that's what we call nudging. The other thing is maybe you want to know about that in order to design products. Products could be a lottery, could be an investment tool, or an investment asset or product. So, and this is what we do. And this is how we need to crack these numbers. But obviously, if you come and do economics, you will learn how to do. This is at the individual level. Then obviously there are other issues at the more macro level that we also do. But I put those aside today. And today we are just gonna try to learn a little bit about how these decisions are made at the individual level. So what we know from the experiments that have been undertaken in the economics literature is that actually decision makers behave differently depending on whether the choice is about gains or is about losses, and also about how much is at stake. So for instance, I'm going to give you a very simple quiz to make, and then you can think about the answer that you would give. Obviously, this is a very simple example, but maybe can give you an idea of how we try to guess decision makers' behavior. So for instance, imagine I tell you, I give you £1 with certainty, or the other option is that you have a 10th, one chance in 10 of getting £10. Which one would you choose? Yeah, I give you a couple of seconds, and then many of you can think whether you would take the pound for sure, or maybe one chance in 10 of getting £10, which obviously is a lot more. Okay, so maybe some of you have decided one, some of you might have decided the other. Now, let me ask you another question. Now, I offer you 1 million with certainty, or one chance in 10 of getting 10 million. Now, you can think about it, but I guess what we find at least is that obviously, while in the first question, many people would take, let's say, the lottery, may take the chance of getting the £10. For the second question, most people would definitely go for the 1 million for sure. But now I'm going to ask the question in a different way. What would you prefer to owe me? You prefer to owe me £1 for sure? Or you have one chance in 10 of owing me £10? Which one would you choose? Okay, I'll give you a couple of seconds to think about it. Some of you might choose one, some of you the other. And now I'm going to ask you another question. What would you prefer to owe me? £1 million for sure. So that means that you have a debt of 1 million that you have to repay to me. Or on the other hand, you say, okay, I'm happy to take one chance in 10 of owing me 10 million. So what we find in economics is, again, while for this question, most people would go for I owe you £1 for sure. Okay. For the second one, many people would actually prefer to take the chance of owing me 10 million with 1/10 probability than to owe me $1 million for sure. Now, what I want you to realize is that these questions are obviously related, okay? And they imply different things. Like this first one here is basically to find out whether people would buy a lottery, okay? While these ones here, the second set that I asked you here, is basically to find out, for instance, whether people would actually take insurance. Because in economics, it's very difficult to model things. Why? Because you have to explain that for the same individual, you have to explain that they sometimes buy a lottery, but also simultaneously that they buy insurance, which they are contradicting in a way. Yeah, because in the first one, you take the gamble. In this one, in the second one, you are actually paying to avoid the gamble. Like, for instance, when you get insurance in your car, what you do is that you are paying to avoid the gamble of having to pay a larger sum if something goes wrong. Okay, so also this depends on whether there are gains or losses, or the stake, the stake of the lottery. The other important thing is maybe your reference point. The reference point for each individual is what we have, what we already owe, or what we expect to earn in the future. So some people have different reference points. Over what point I'm going to analyze whether I will have a gain or a loss. And then this is also very typical in health economics. Sometimes when you have to give treatments, there is an interesting issue here, because sometimes if you ask somebody, you are told to have 40 more years to live with, let's say, an illness. How many years in full health you consider equivalent to 40 years with maybe a particular illness, let's say arthritis? Okay. And that sometimes helps, to measure the treatments or whether they are taking or not. Let's say some people might say 30 years. But then if they are asked, now you are told you have 30 more years to live in full health. How many years with that illness, let's say arthritis, you consider equivalent to 30 years in full health? Now, what we find is that the typical answer is actually above 40 years. So even though the question implies more or less the same trade-off, depending on how people take the reference point, whether they think is 40 years of life with the illness or 30 years of life with full health, the answer is different. And then they might decide to take a treatment, or they might decide to decline it. Okay, so this is just to illustrate how important these things are. And then once you have answered all these questions in economics, for instance, we are able to classify your choices according to that. So for instance, we would say that over gains, if there is a high probability of something happening, or there is a lot of money at stake, then people maybe are risk averse. So you bet on the sure thing, you take the sure thing, you avoid the gamble. However, if it's a low probability event, or maybe the stakes are low, then people take the lottery, people gamble for that. However, if it involves losses, and this will depend on your reference point, and that's very important, I will talk a bit more about this later, then if there is a very high probability of losses, or the stakes are very high, actually people are risk-seeking of that, which obviously is, sometimes thought of as a bad thing in humans' behavior, because a lot of people maybe ruin themselves because they take chances when they are already losing heavily. Okay, while if the losses are more moderate, then people actually, what they do is that they pay to avoid the bet, and then for instance just to take insurance. Okay, so you can see how we can basically with different methods figure out how people behave and what's going to then be their decisions, because this is the festival of numbers. Okay, and then I needed to show at least some numbers. I'm going to do that. You're going to say, what the heck is this graph here? Okay, so here on the horizontal axis we have a probability, okay, that goes between 0 and 1, or 1 is like 100% probability something is going to happen for sure. 0, very close to 0, that something is very unlikely to happen. And then here on the vertical axis, what we show is that how people value those probabilities. So this red 45-degree line, the green line here, what it says that if people, choose those points, that means that they would actually evaluate probabilities according to their true value. What we find in research typically in economics is that actually people overweight low probabilities. And that means that events that are very unlikely, people think that are more likely of what they actually are. And this has important implications because, for instance, if you're an insurance company, that would, for instance, allow you to charge an extra premium because people might think that the bad event would occur more often than what it actually happens. And then the reverse happens with very high probability event that people typically think that they happen less often than they actually do. Okay, so I hope you didn't find these too challenging, but you got the intuition about it. And then what I'm going to do is that I'm going to give you a few examples of research that some of my colleagues in the economics department have done in the past that basically exploits this behavior and this aversion or willingness to take risk or not under uncertainty. For instance, one thing, as I said, is that one of the things that determine the decision is your reference point. And in that sense, it's very important for people to know what they expect to obtain out of the, let's say, gamble, what they expect to earn. And here a gamble might imply doing a degree or choosing a job over another one. Okay, and that's why in that respect, role models play a role. You would say why? For instance, as Catherine Porter, one of our, as I said, researchers in the department as proved, is that being exposed to a speech by an inspirational female role model who studied economics actually increases the chances of young women studying economics. And this was done in a university in the US. Why? Because that means that if you can project yourself to this successful person, you might actually think that you'll be able to get there, to earn that much, to achieve that status. Okay, and that basically increases your expectation about maybe future outcomes. Catherine does a lot of work also in developing countries, and she has also been able to test. Obviously, this is rigorously, even though obviously I'm just talking about it today, there is a lot of rigorous cracking numbers behind this, that a speech by a young person who managed to complete their secondary school increases student aspirations for their own education and gender attitudes. This is in Somalia, in a developing country. Other research that I will show in a second, for instance, by our colleague Ian Walker about choices of secondary school, made by parents for their children. I will show in a second. I can click here, but the problem is that if I click here, okay, I need to stop sharing this screen, so I will go back to that. Another of our colleagues, Eyal Winter, has used these insights that he's been acquiring over many years of research to advise the government about the COVID-19 related policies, about easing off policies, the lockdown, etc. Also, one of our colleagues that also works in developing economics, Sorab, how corruption might affect people's behavior. So what I'm going to do, maybe I have a couple of minutes here, is to stop sharing this screen, and then I'm gonna show you this stories that have appeared in the newspapers. The one by Ian Walker, you can see here, our colleague. Basically, what happens is that in England, in order to choose your school, you're allowed to make 3 choices, okay? And then what happens is that parents actually think that, you know, in order to maybe place the children in a very good school is too much of a long shot. So they play safe. And then the choices that they made are maybe schools where they think their child is going to go for sure, because if you don't get in any of the 3 places that you choose, you are allocated another one where there is capacity, and then obviously it's out of your control. So basically, as you can see here, you know, your willingness to take risk is very important for a school choice. And then, as is summarized here in the article by Ian Walker, is that maybe making changes, you know, making just slight changes in the way parents have to choose the school might be in the benefit of many of them, especially, you know, people maybe with low income. Okay? Also, Eyal Winter, as you can see there, also his work summarized in The Guardian, how he advised the government on COVID-19 policies here. You know, Eyal here, you know, with all his knowledge about, you know, framing the way that you have to present the different options about lockdown, easing of the policies, etc., to people might be more effective than other ones. Okay. So, and this is the one by Surab about the psychological cost of corruption in developing countries. So you can see all very interesting, making use of this. In order to make your reference point, as you see, obviously, in any way, as you can see here in this article by the BBC, the returns to education in economics are very high. Okay, is just second to medicine. So in that sense, you know, if you decide to make economics, in principle, that sounds like a good choice. And just to finalize, I wanted to make a final remark here. Okay. And is that obviously, with this in mind, you have economics, high expected return, a lot of options you can study in economics. But it is also true that even though there are a lot of numbers involved when you study economics, and then some students might say, wow, but this is maybe the hardest thing of the degree. Well, it's not. Numbers is not the hardest thing when you do an economics degree. The hardest thing is obviously you have the opportunity cost of watching Netflix. Okay, so with that, I finish, and I'm more than happy to take any of your questions.
Lovely stuff, guys. So if you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat, or if you're comfortable, please just unmute yourself and ask away. Before they come in, I'll just quickly ask a question just to get the ball rolling a bit. So when you're talking in the presentation about all those news articles, and you used the one from Eyal Winter, who lectured me in 3rd year, really brilliant. One of the main benefits I saw before I came and did my economics course was being able to apply what I was reading in the news and what was going on in the world to the economics course. And I was, you know, you saw that with the COVID-19 and, you know, the benefits of doing certain degrees. Have you just got any tips of how people, before they come to university, can maybe start to think of that in a different way? So applying what they know to current affairs.
Yeah, sure. Well, well, as I said, it will always, you have to think that it will always depend on your attitude toward risk. Okay, what we are saying today is that it depends, but it's true that information is very important. And you can see, for instance, the example of the vaccination. Some people are comparing, is it better to get one particular vaccine rather than the other, or maybe not having a vaccine? So for instance, one of the advices that was taken is that for the government to present that obviously there may be a very tiny, small risk, you know, of getting side effects of the vaccine, but obviously the probability of being infected if you don't get a vaccine is way, way higher than that, all right? So obviously that's a very clear one, I think, that these days people can think of.
Lovely. I don't know if we just got a question in the chat there. You're able to see the chat, Ivan?
Let me see. Yeah, probably, yes. Thank you very much. Are there any evidences or studies to quote regarding personal choice of people which seem to overestimate the events with lower probabilities? Indeed, there are many, many of them. And if you obviously join the economics and you come here, and I think Finn, for instance, did that in the third year, he did behavioral economics, and then you can see a lot of references, you know, where people actually studies in many countries of the world overestimate small probabilities. What I would advise this person, I think, is Shanawaz Khan, to drop me an email, and then I will send this person the specific references, the papers where you know, you can find this evidence.
Thank you very much, everyone. Do we have any more questions at all? Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, Ivan, and thank you, Finn. It was really interesting. We will actually be having another workshop now, which will be starting in 1 minute's time. It's called Fashionable Numbers, the Hype and Challenges of Using Big Data in Marketing. So I'm just going to pop the link to that in the chat box here. And again, if you do have any questions at all throughout the day, please don't hesitate to contact us. You can either contact Ivan, of course, for economic information, and also you can contact me at lums@lancaster.ac.uk. So thank you for your time, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks very much.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.